The marble corridors of the Dallas County Courthouse echoed with the footsteps of attorneys, plaintiffs, and defendants moving between courtrooms like pieces on a chessboard. Thomas Reed pushed his cleaning cart slowly down the hall, the wheels squeaking slightly against the polished floor. He wore a navy blue custodial uniform with a name patch that read Tom stitched above the breast pocket. A ring of keys jangled at his hip, and a spray bottle of cleaning solution protruded from his cart alongside microfiber cloths and trash bags. To anyone passing by, Thomas was invisible. Just another member of the cleaning staff, part of the scenery, someone whose presence barely registered in the consciousness of the lawyers and judges who walked these halls every day. But Thomas Reed was not a janitor. At 39 years old, Thomas held a Juris Doctor from Harvard Law School, had clerked for a federal appeals court judge, and had spent 12 years as a successful civil rights attorney. He had argued cases before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, won landmark discrimination settlements, and built a reputation as one of the sharpest legal minds in Texas. 3 months ago, he had taken on a new kind of case. A pattern of discrimination complaints had emerged from the Dallas County legal community. Black attorneys, paralegals, and court staff were reporting systematic bias, being dismissed in courtrooms, having their credentials questioned, and facing obstacles their white counterparts never encountered. But proving it was difficult. Discrimination had become subtle, coded, and nearly impossible to document. So Thomas had devised a plan. He would go undercover as a janitor in the courthouse, observing how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. He would document the bias, record the interactions, and build an airtight case that would force the legal system to confront its own prejudices. The Texas Bar Association's Ethics Committee had approved the operation, albeit reluctantly. Thomas's law license was temporarily listed as inactive in public records to maintain his cover. He'd partnered with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, who provided oversight and ensured everything was legal and ethical. For 3 months, Thomas had cleaned courtrooms, emptied trash cans, and mopped floors. He had heard lawyers make racist jokes when they thought no one of consequence was listening. He had watched judges treat black attorneys with skepticism while giving white attorneys the benefit of the doubt. He'd documented it all, building a case that would shake the Dallas legal community to its core. Today was the final day of his undercover operation, and today he would be in courtroom 5C, where attorney Richard Westbrook was defending a major corporation against a discrimination lawsuit. Thomas had been watching Westbrook for weeks. The man was a partner at Westbrook & Associates, one of Dallas's most prestigious corporate law firms. He had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and according to several complaints Thomas had reviewed, deeply biased against attorneys of color. Thomas pushed his cart into courtroom 5C just as the morning session was beginning. The courtroom was traditional Texas grandeur, rich wood paneling, brass fixtures, and an elevated judge's bench that commanded respect. Judge Patricia Whitmore, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for running a tight courtroom, was already seated. The plaintiff's legal team was setting up at their table. Leading them was Michelle Torres, a sharp Latina attorney Thomas knew from his previous career. She caught his eye for a brief second, a flicker of recognition quickly masked. She was one of the few people who knew about Thomas's undercover work. At the defense table sat Richard Westbrook. He was in his early 50s, with silver hair styled with precision, a charcoal Armani suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the kind of confident posture that came from decades of winning. His legal team surrounded him, associates and paralegals organizing documents with practiced efficiency. Thomas began his custodial routine, emptying the small trash bins near the gallery, wiping down the wooden benches, staying in character. He was careful to appear focused on his work, unremarkable, invisible. That's when Westbrook noticed him. Thomas felt the attorney's gaze land on him, assessing, dismissing. Westbrook leaned toward one of his associates and whispered something. The associate smirked. Thomas continued working, but he was hyper-aware now, every sense attuned to what was coming. Judge Whitmore called the court to order. "Counsel, are we ready to proceed?" Michelle Torres stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff is ready." Westbrook rose, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." "Very well," Judge Whitmore said. "Ms. Torres, you may call your first witness." Michelle stood again. "Your Honor, before we begin testimony, I'd like to introduce a member of our legal team who will be assisting with evidence presentation today." She gestured toward Thomas, who set down his cleaning supplies and approached the plaintiff's table. He reached into his cart and pulled out a leather legal folder, the same one he'd hidden there that morning. Westbrook's eyes narrowed. "Your Honor, what is this? Is the plaintiff's counsel really bringing a janitor to the counsel table?" Michelle's expression remained professional. "Your Honor, this is Thomas Reed. He's a licensed attorney and will be assisting our team today." Westbrook let out a sharp laugh. "I'm sorry, did you say attorney?" "Your Honor, I've been practicing law in Dallas for 28 years, and I've never heard of any attorney named Thomas Reed. And even if he were an attorney, showing up to court in a janitor's uniform is a mockery of this courtroom's dignity." Judge Whitmore looked skeptical, but addressed Michelle. "Counselor, is Mr. Reed a member of the bar?" Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative. "I am, Your Honor. Texas Bar number 246-81357, Harvard Law School, class of 2008. I also hold bar admission in New York and California." Westbrook scoffed loudly. "This is absurd. Your Honor, I move to have this man removed from the courtroom. He's clearly not an attorney. Look at him. He's dressed like custodial staff. He was just pushing a cleaning cart, and now Ms. Torres expects us to believe he's qualified to practice law." Judge Whitmore frowned. "Mr. Reed, can you provide documentation of your bar membership?" Thomas opened his leather folder and pulled out his bar card, his law school diploma, and a letter from the Texas Bar Association. He approached the bench and handed them to the judge. Westbrook stood abruptly. "Your Honor, anyone can fake documents. I demand verification through the State Bar website before we proceed." Judge Whitmore's expression was unreadable as she examined the documents. "Bailiff, please verify Mr. Reed's bar number." The bailiff moved to the court's computer and began typing. The courtroom fell silent, all eyes on the screen. Thomas stood calmly, hands clasped in front of him, while Westbrook radiated indignation. After a moment, the bailiff looked up. "Your Honor, Thomas Reed is confirmed as an active member of the Texas State Bar. Admitted 2008, currently in good standing." Westbrook's face went red. "That's impossible. I saw him cleaning this courtroom 10 minutes ago." Thomas turned to face Westbrook, his expression neutral. "I was cleaning the courtroom, Mr. Westbrook." As part of an undercover investigation authorized by the Texas Bar Association Ethics Committee and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Westbrook looked like he'd been slapped. Judge Whitmore banged her gavel. "Order!" "Mr. Reed, what investigation are you referring to?" Thomas pulled another document from his folder. "Your Honor, for the past 3 months, I've been working undercover as custodial staff in this courthouse to document patterns of discrimination and bias in the Dallas County legal system. This investigation was approved by the appropriate oversight bodies, and I have the authorization letter here." He handed the letter to the bailiff, who delivered it to Judge Whitmore. She read it carefully, her expression growing more serious with each line. Westbrook found his voice. "This is entrapment. This is unethical. Your Honor, I demand that any evidence gathered through this deception be excluded," Thomas replied calmly. "It's not entrapment, Mr. Westbrook. I've simply observed public behavior in a public building. Everything I've documented has been said or done in spaces where anyone, including custodial staff, had legal access." Judge Whitmore set down the letter. "Mr. Reed, have you been recording conversations or documenting behavior related to this case?" "Not this specific case, Your Honor." My investigation is broader, examining systemic issues in the courthouse. However, I am here today in my capacity as a licensed attorney to assist Ms. Torres with this case. My undercover work is separate, though it may eventually result in additional legal action. Westbrook was livid now. Your Honor, this is a circus. I will not be made a fool of by some affirmative action attorney playing dress-up. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Westbrook seemed to realize he'd crossed a line. His face paled slightly, but he didn't back down. Judge Whitmore's voice was ice. Mr. Westbrook, you will watch your language in my courtroom. Thomas remained calm, though inside he felt a surge of vindication. This was exactly the kind of moment he'd been working to expose. Your Honor, I'd like the record to reflect Mr. Westbrook's comment. So noted, Judge Whitmore said, her disapproval evident. Mr. Westbrook, do you have any legitimate objection to Mr. Reed's participation as counsel other than his unconventional attire? Westbrook's jaw worked, but he seemed to struggle for words. Finally, he said, Your Honor, his presence is prejudicial. The jury will be influenced by this stunt. Michelle Torres stood. Your Honor, if Mr. Westbrook is concerned about prejudice, perhaps we should examine why he's so troubled by an attorney who happens to be black appearing in a janitor's uniform. The only prejudice I see is his own. Westbrook pointed at Thomas. Don't you dare pull the race card. This has nothing to do with race. This is about professional standards. Professional standards, Thomas said quietly, his voice cutting through Westbrook's bluster. Like the standard of treating all attorneys with respect, regardless of their appearance? Like the standard of not assuming someone's qualifications based on the color of their skin? Westbrook's face was now a deep crimson. I didn't assume anything based on race. I assumed based on the fact that you were dressed as a janitor. And yet, Thomas replied, his tone still calm. When I presented my credentials, you insisted they must be fake. When the bailiff confirmed my bar membership, you called it impossible. At what point, Mr. Westbrook, would you have accepted that a black man in this courtroom might actually be an attorney? The question hung in the air. Westbrook opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. That's not, you're twisting my words. Judge Whitmore had heard enough. Mr. Westbrook, sit down. Mr. Reed's credentials have been verified. He is permitted to serve as counsel in this case. If you have any further objections, file them in writing. Now, can we please proceed with this trial? Westbrook sat heavily, his face still flushed. His associates avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in their legal pads. Thomas took his place at the plaintiff's table, now fully in his role as an attorney. He removed his custodial shirt, revealing a crisp white dress shirt underneath. From his legal folder, he pulled out a tie and jacket, transforming his appearance in moments. Michelle leaned over and whispered, "That was beautiful." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "We're just getting started." The trial proceeded, but the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Westbrook, usually commanding and confident, was rattled. His cross-examinations lacked their typical precision, his objections were weaker, and every time he looked at Thomas there was a flicker of something in his eyes, anger, humiliation, maybe even fear. Thomas, meanwhile, was in his element. He presented evidence with the skill of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. He questioned witnesses with surgical precision, and he built the plaintiff's case methodically, piece by piece, until even Westbrook's associates could see where it was headed. During a recess, Westbrook approached Michelle and Thomas outside the courtroom. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by desperation. "Ms. Torres, Mr. Reed," he said, his voice low. "Perhaps we could discuss a settlement." Michelle raised an eyebrow. "This morning you were confident you'd win. What changed?" Westbrook glanced at Thomas. "I may have been hasty in my earlier statements. I'd like to resolve this matter without further complications." Thomas studied him. "Complications like a formal complaint to the bar about your conduct? Or complications like the media finding out how you treated an attorney in open court?" Westbrook's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to be reasonable." "No," Thomas said. "You're trying to save your reputation. But you should have thought about that before you assumed I was unqualified based on what I was wearing." Westbrook's expression hardened. "You set me up. You deliberately dressed like that to provoke a reaction." "I dressed like this," Thomas replied, "to see how people in this courthouse treat those they perceive as less than them. You showed me exactly who you are, Mr. Westbrook, and now you have to live with the consequences." The recess ended, and they returned to the courtroom. The trial continued for 2 more days. Thomas's performance was flawless, his arguments airtight, his examination of witnesses devastating to Westbrook's defense. When the jury returned, they deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict was unanimous in favor of the plaintiff. The damages awarded were substantial, enough to make headlines and send a message to other corporations about the cost of discrimination. But the real reckoning for Westbrook came afterward. The Texas Bar Association launched a formal investigation into Westbrook's conduct during the trial. The comments he'd made, his assumptions, his treatment of Thomas, all of it was reviewed in the context of other complaints that had been filed against him over the years. What the investigation uncovered was damning. Multiple attorneys of color reported being belittled by Westbrook in court. His firm's hiring practices showed a troubling pattern: few minority associates, almost no black partners, and a culture that valued connections over competence. Westbrook tried to defend himself, claiming he'd been provoked, that the undercover operation was unfair, that he was being made a scapegoat for systemic issues. But the evidence was overwhelming. 6 months after the trial, Richard Westbrook was suspended from practicing law for 2 years. His firm, facing public backlash and client defections, forced him to resign. The Westbrook name, once synonymous with legal excellence in Dallas, became associated with discrimination and bias. Thomas's undercover investigation, meanwhile, bore fruit. His documentation led to a comprehensive review of practices in the Dallas County Courthouse. Mandatory bias training was implemented, hiring practices were reformed, and an independent oversight committee was established to handle discrimination complaints. The legal community was divided. Some praised Thomas for his courage and creativity in exposing systemic bias. Others criticized the undercover operation as unethical, regardless of the approvals he'd obtained. But Thomas didn't concern himself with the critics. He'd accomplished what he set out to do: shine a light on the discrimination that too many people faced in silence and create accountability where none had existed. 1 year after the trial, Thomas was invited to speak at Harvard Law School's annual Civil Rights Symposium. The auditorium was packed with students, professors, and legal professionals eager to hear about his unconventional investigation. Thomas stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. Many were young, idealistic, hungry for justice, but uncertain how to achieve it in a system that often seemed stacked against change. "When I decided to go undercover," Thomas began, "I knew I was taking a risk. I knew some people would question my methods, my ethics, maybe even my sanity. But I also knew that traditional approaches weren't working. Discrimination complaints were filed and ignored. Bias persisted because it was invisible to those in power." He paused, letting his words sink in. "So I made myself invisible. I became the person that lawyers like Richard Westbrook don't see: the janitor, the service worker, the human being who's present but not present, seen but not acknowledged." A student in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Reed, some critics have said your investigation was entrapment, that you deliberately provoked discriminatory behavior." Thomas nodded. "I've heard that criticism. But here's the thing. I didn't make anyone say or do anything. I simply existed in a space where I had every legal right to be, doing a job that needed to be done. The only thing I provoked was honesty. When people thought no one important was watching, they revealed their true attitudes." Another student spoke up. "What would you say to those who argue that one case, one attorney's suspension, doesn't address the systemic issues?" "I'd say they're right," Thomas replied. "One case doesn't solve everything, but it's a start. It's a crack in the foundation. And if enough of us keep applying pressure, those cracks will widen until the whole system has to change." He leaned forward, his voice growing more passionate. "Here's what I learned from this experience. Discrimination isn't always loud. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's in the assumptions people make when they see someone who doesn't fit their image of what a lawyer should look like. It's in the extra scrutiny, the questioning of credentials, the subtle signals that you don't belong." The room was silent, everyone hanging on his words. But here's the thing about assumptions. They reveal more about the person making them than the person they're made about. When Richard Westbrook looked at me and assumed I couldn't be an attorney, he wasn't seeing me. He was seeing his own biases, his own limitations, his own prejudices. Thomas straightened, his voice firm. "And that's what we're up against. Not just individual bigots, but a system that allows those bigots to thrive. A system that rewards assumptions over evidence, connections over competence, comfort over justice." A professor in the back stood. "So what's the solution, Mr. Reed?" Thomas smiled. "The solution is each of us, doing what we can with what we have. For me, it was putting on a janitor's uniform and documenting what I saw. For you, it might be something different. But the common thread is this: we can't wait for the system to fix itself. We have to be the ones who fix it." The applause started slowly, then built into a standing ovation. As Thomas stepped down from the podium, students swarmed him with questions, thanking him for his courage, asking for advice on their own battles against discrimination. Later that evening, Thomas sat in a quiet corner of a Cambridge cafe, reviewing notes for a new case. His phone rang. It was Michelle Torres. "Thomas, you'll want to see this. Check the news." Thomas pulled up a news site on his phone. The headline read, "Texas Supreme Court upholds sanctions against attorney Richard Westbrook. Appellate court affirms discrimination findings." Westbrook had appealed his suspension all the way to the state's highest court, and he'd lost. The ruling was final. His career, for all practical purposes, was over. Thomas felt no satisfaction in Westbrook's downfall. It had never been about revenge. It had been about accountability, about showing that actions have consequences, about proving that the legal system could police itself if forced to confront its failures. He put down his phone and returned to his case notes. There was still work to do, still battles to fight, still clients who needed someone willing to challenge the system on their behalf. 5 years later, Thomas Reed was appointed to the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct, a position that gave him oversight over judges and attorneys across the state. It was a role perfectly suited to his mission, ensuring that the legal profession lived up to its ideals of justice and equality. He never forgot that day in courtroom 5C, the moment he revealed his true identity. The look on Westbrook's face, the shift in power that came not from his credentials or his position, but from his willingness to expose an uncomfortable truth. Thomas continued to take on cases others wouldn't touch. He mentored young attorneys of color, teaching them not just legal strategy, but how to navigate a system that wasn't built for them. He spoke at conferences, wrote articles, and served on committees dedicated to reforming the legal profession. And sometimes, when he walked through a courthouse, he'd see a janitor or a custodian working quietly in the background. He'd make a point to acknowledge them, to say hello, to treat them with the dignity that every person deserved. Because Thomas Reed understood something that many lawyers never learned. Respect isn't determined by job titles or degrees or the cut of your suit. It's determined by how you treat people when you think no one's watching. And in a courtroom, someone is always watching. Richard Westbrook never practiced law again. His appeals exhausted, his reputation destroyed, he left Dallas and took a job teaching paralegal courses at a community college in a small Texas town. Some said he'd become bitter, blaming others for his downfall. Others claimed he'd found humility, finally understanding the harm he'd caused. Thomas didn't keep track. Westbrook's story was over. But the work Thomas had started continued, in courtrooms across Texas, in law schools training the next generation, in the countless small moments when someone chose dignity over prejudice. The legal system was far from perfect. Discrimination still existed, woven into procedures and practices and unspoken assumptions. But it was better than it had been. And it would continue to improve as long as people like Thomas Reed kept fighting. Because justice, real justice, wasn't something you achieved once and declared victory. It was something you fought for every single day, in every single case, in every single interaction. And sometimes that fight started with a janitor's uniform and the courage to let people reveal who they really were. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.